Hey guys, this is our third and hopefully final time that we have to make this disclaimer. In this episode on purity sermons, we had a lot of issues with audio and most of the audio got distorted or messed up, and we did what we could to try to improve it and bring it back to life so that it's easily understandable. But we feel like the enemy definitely tried to do what he could to stop us from sharing this message and all of the value that's in this video. But regardless of that, we still want to be obedient to God and post it anyway, because we feel like what's on this video has the power to change lives. So regardless, we just want to encourage you, even though the audio may not be the best, there will be better quality audio moving forward. And also the value is still in the wisdom that's in this video. So regardless, we encourage you to listen and enjoy. Let's get right into it. Welcome to the Grace Embrace podcast. Today we're going to be talking about purity sermons. Today we're talking about purity sermons. It's something you and I talk about a lot.
I think the term purity sermons
is unheard of.
You're gonna have to break that down because that's your own created name for this.
Yeah, some people call it purity culture. So I'm not the only one who talks about this, but it is very rarely talked about. So that's why I want to cover it, because I think it's really important, and I think it's really important to God because ultimately purity sermons, and we'll break down what they are, end up actually doing a lot of damage to people's lives and their relationship with God and their walk with Him.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Let's break down what they are to begin with. So purity sermons are the messages that unknowingly, a lot of times it's unknowingly, are taught in churches or in Bible studies, youth groups, whatever, that sound like a godly message, but really they actually contradict the Bible and contradict the gospel altogether. And the messages overall are that your sin can, in fact, after salvation, separate you from God. And two, it's your job to address and deal with your sin before you run to Jesus.
Yeah, even if they don't directly say that.
Right.
That's like what you get from the message.
Right. Those are the core value bullet points that come out of purity sermons.
I feel like youth groups are the number one place that usually really push them. Because you don't hear it as much in like adult church, if you will. You know what I mean? I think
another message that comes from purity sermons is that if you lose your purity, whatever that looks like, you can't get it back. So you better not lose it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Like well, I won't say everybody. If you've grown up in a church, there's a strong chance that you've heard that from a youth pastor or someone.
Right, even other peers.
Yes, that like once you've messed it up, there's an array of different analogies. But once you have lost that or done something, you can't get it back.
Some of the analogies are like the person on stage, whoever that be, whether it be a pastor or a peer or whatever, they'll have a flower and they'll say, oh, this is your value, this is your purity. And then when you mess it up, they crumple it up and they throw it on the floor and they stomp on it and they go, look how useless it is now. That's why you shouldn't.
And a lot of times, obviously, they try to make it not sound like that exactly.
Right.
But like I've heard, like a piece of paper, right? It's like, this is you now, right? And then you crumple it up and then you try to smooth it back out, but it's never going to look the same. And they're like, this is purity. This is why you don't want to sleep with somebody before marriage and all that.
Or why you don't want to sin in general.
Right. And it's like, okay, I get what you're saying, but that is a terrible way to say it. And also, it's not true in the extent of that you can never be pure again after that. Like, that's not
the case at all. I think just talking about that analogy specifically, I think it's really false, because if that were true, we'd have to assume that God can't do everything and anything. You're saying that God is incapable of smoothing that paper back out? The creator of it, the creator of everything? You're saying that the person who's supposed to be our Redeemer, Jesus, can't redeem us?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like, it's in direct contradiction to the gospel.
Right, like they're talking about, of course, in the physical, yes, like you have done this thing, you can't get that back. I get what you're saying. I don't think you should be like, yes, everybody sleep with everybody in high school. But at the same time, that is very, very damaging to people, because it's like, oh my gosh, what if I already did that? Or what if I end up doing that?
So we're going down a pathway. Let's back up a little bit, because we're going to cover all of those different confusions. We're going to cover all of them and make sure that everything is airtight and we're all good. So let's keep going through some of these false messages and some of the lies, and then we'll step into why they're not accurate. Okay. So another one is, and it's talking about sin a lot, but I've heard this so many times, light and dark can't coexist. So if you have the Holy Spirit in you and you sin, oh no, your light's going to dim out a little bit, or maybe God won't talk to you as much, or you won't be able to hear his voice as accurately, or, you know, you won't be able to enter into his presence as often or as much or whatever if you're living a life of sin. And again, none of the messages are true. The reason I disagree with the light and dark one is, again, it's a lot about what we talked about in the last episode as well. It's carrying and preaching the mindset that darkness overcomes light. And it's so inaccurate because if you even logically look at the analogy, if you have a dark room and you bring light into it, like a candle or a flashlight, it illuminates the room and it casts out darkness.
Yeah.
But you can't take a room that's filled with light and bring darkness into it and have the light flee. It doesn't work that way. But we're taught the reverse in these purity sermons where it's like, oh, be careful. If you sin, God won't be able to X, Y, and Z, or you won't be able to X, Y, and Z as far as your relationship with him.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. If you're filled with the living Spirit of God, right, the Holy Spirit, if you actually have a relationship with God and you've received salvation, there is no amount of anything that can separate you from him. Like, that's literally the point of the gospel. That's the point of Jesus dying on the cross, is to eliminate any kind of separation that we could have.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And
That's
again,
the whole purpose.
That's the thing that's really hard, especially when you're young and you're taught things like that, because it just like, I remember having like, oh my gosh, like I can mess it up. And then if I do this, then he's going to be mad at me. And then I can never get it back because that's what they said. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, it messes with your mind. And again, it's not the gospel. It's not, it's not biblical.
So that's the first lie, is that sin can separate you. That's basically what we just covered. The second part is that when sin does separate us, it's our job to fix it before and without God. So like, if you sin, you better pray it off, or you better wait for the sin to wear off, or you better do good deeds to counterbalance your sin. Right? These are the subliminal, subconscious messages that are passed down through purity sermons, where it's like, oh no, I failed and I fall short. Therefore, instead of allowing Jesus to cover the debt, I have to somehow pay for it. I have to somehow make it up. I have to somehow reconcile without God.
Yeah.
Before I'm allowed to go before him. And that's the exact opposite.
Exactly.
If you want freedom from sin, if you want to reconcile and have a relationship with God, just go to him. Even in the midst of your sin, just run to him, because he's the only thing who can clean us.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't make any sense for me to try to clean myself so that I can go and take a shower.
Right. And I think, again, with purity sermons, typically what they're talking about in the context is like sexual purity, stuff like that.
Sure.
So
I think it applies to that and sin in general.
It does.
Both.
But I think a lot of times in like, especially the youth group scenarios we're talking about, they're going for that. And I think that is an area where people are particularly like keen to hide from God.
Right.
Like,
fall into guilt and
like,
shame.
This is too messy. Like, this is too personal or whatever. I have to fix this before I can go to God.
Right.
And because they've heard that stuff in youth group or wherever they've heard it from, again, it makes them run from God instead of run to him in that.
Absolutely. It is very much a strategy of the enemy to try and convince us to try to fix it on our own without him. Because if we're trying to fix it for God, we can't be fixing it with him.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, if we're trying to do it for him, we will put off engaging in relationship with God until we do have everything fixed, which we never will, because we're human and we're fallen and we're incapable of perfection on our own. So we'll sit here and we'll try to deal with this problem that we ultimately can't fix, and we'll never end up going to God because we keep putting it off.
Right.
And that's the trap that the enemy has set for us, because he would much rather us be preoccupied with trying to manufacture our own perfection and our own purity instead of just using the purity and perfection that's freely available to us through Jesus.
Right. Or just wants you in a place of beating yourself up to no end, to where you won't go to Jesus in the same way.
Right. You feel too guilty. You feel too undeserving. You feel too unworthy.
Like, well, they told me not to do it and I did it. So now what? Like, I'm an outcast for the rest of my days, you know?
Or maybe God's mad at me, or God's disappointed in me, or God's X, Y, and Z, and he doesn't want to be around me, or doesn't want to be a part of me, or doesn't want to see me, or whatever, you know? But none of that's true. The biggest desire in God's heart when we sin is for us to bring it back to him.
Yeah.
And that goes back into a small subcategory of this message, which is the difference between conviction and guilt and shame. This is such an important message, because not many people notice the difference. They think that they're the same thing, or that one is the other. There's just so much confusion, right? So guilt and shame says things to us like this: look at what you did. You have to fix it now. You're not worthy of coming before God. You're disgusting. There's something wrong with you.
How could
God
you do
doesn't
that?
God doesn't want to see you like that. God doesn't want to see that part of you. God doesn't want to see you when you do that. That's guilt and shame. All of it is a voice that tries to separate us from God.
Mm-hmm.
But conviction says, I see that part of you. I see the sin. I see the filth, but I love you anyway. Run back to me. I want that thing. I want to address that thing. I want to talk about that thing. I want to deal with it with you without making you feel bad about it.
Right. And I've heard people say that the way to tell the difference is like, if, conviction will draw you closer to God, and guilt and shame always makes you want to take a step back from Him.
Absolutely.
So that's a good way. If you're like, I don't know if this is conviction or is this shame, that's a good way to tell.
If you feel some sort of blockage or some sort of friction where you don't feel comfortable going to God in that moment, it's guilt and shame.
Yeah.
It's not conviction. Conviction, you can, and I'm not saying you should do this, because again, let's make this disclaimer really quick. I love making this disclaimer because it's super important. Sin is still wrong. Sin is still bad. Okay. But in the moments where you do slip up and you do make a mistake and you sin, you should be able to feel the freedom through conviction to drop on your knees right after you do sin and say, Lord, I'm here. This is my sin. This is my filth. Help me.
Yeah.
I can't do this on my own. Help me deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Help me get out of this. I need freedom. I need deliverance. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's conviction. Guilt and shame is, I did something bad. Let me hide it. I'm in the Garden of Eden and I disobeyed. Let me hide my shame.
Right.
Let me hide my nakedness. That's guilt and shame. Conviction is saying, Lord, I messed up. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Come and deal with me. Come and talk with me. And I don't mean deal as in punish. I mean, let's work this out, because my relationship with you is so much more important than whether I'm doing right or wrong.
Right. Conviction is kind of like pulling on your heart, like, this isn't something I need to be doing. But it's not like you're a terrible person. It's like, that was a bad thing.
Right.
Like, let's not do that. But
and we're going to talk about that too.
Self-attack.
Right. Absolutely. Another important aspect behind purity sermons. Our actions are not connected to our identity or worth.
Mm-hmm.
Who I am, my value and my identity and what I'm worth is not and should not be attached to my actions that I carry out.
Yeah.
Or the sin that I happen to be stuck in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, again, I'm not condoning sin. I'm not saying it's okay and it's fine if you are stuck in it. God still wants you to be free. I still want you to be free. Freedom is a good thing, and there's a reason we should value it, right?
Yeah.
Sin is a bad thing, and there's a reason we should want to avoid it. And we'll talk about the reasons why in a minute. But the point I'm trying to make now is that it is very real and very possible, okay, even though it's not condoned, it's not a good thing, and I'm not encouraging it, it's very real and very possible to have a vibrant relationship with God while also simultaneously being, unfortunately, stuck in sin because of our human nature and our humanness, right? But here's the thing. How do we respond and how do we act in those situations? Are we going, Lord, I'm going to choose guilt and shame and I'm going to hide this from you and I'm going to try to fix it and I'm going to try to deal with it and I'll try to do all of this on my own without you, for you? Yeah. Or are we going to choose conviction and go, Lord, I'm back. I'm here again. Like, help me. Help me. Yeah. Let's do this together. I can't do it on my own. I need you to help me. I'm going to be vulnerable. Here it is.
Right. I think another important distinction to make with that is like, you can be fully in love with God and sinning, but I don't feel like it's a thing where you're like fully in love and okay with your sin and fully in love with Jesus. Like, you can be sinning and wishing you weren't. Like Paul says,
absolutely.
Like, I wish I can't think of it. You know what I'm talking about? Whenever he says, I do what I don't want to do.
Right.
Like, you'll have to find the verse. But yeah, anyway, like, he was walking with Jesus in ministry and all of these things, but continuously having that thorn in his flesh.
Right.
And yeah.
It's about which one do you love?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, ultimately in this life, unfortunately, sin is unavoidable. It's just part of being a fallen human being, right? But am I in love with my sin and indulging in it constantly, using my free will, my willingness to choose that thing? Or am I choosing to fall in love with God, even though I may be stuck in certain areas of sin in my life?
Yeah.
Okay, there's the huge contrast. Which one do I love? Do I love sin, even though I am a Christian? Or do I love God, even though I'm stuck in sin? Both of those situations, the physical actions that are being carried out may even be the exact same, but the position of the heart is the thing that's different. So there's a scripture verse that I have. We're really kind of jumping all over my notes, per usual. but let me see if I can find the scripture verse because it talks about, it gives a perfect example of this. Hold on. Okay, so it's 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as a man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart.
Right.
This is the different contrast we're trying to make, okay? Our physical actions are one thing. The outward appearance is one thing, but the inward process, the inward heart, right? What we're falling in love with is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
God values the position of our heart more than the actions of our hands.
Right.
Because here's the thing. Some people right now who are listening to this are going, oh my gosh, what? That's blasphemy. That's this, that, and the other. There's complete disagreements. But here's the thing. I want you to hear this out, okay? Think about the person who's a heroin addict who just gave his life to Jesus. His flesh is addicted to this thing that we might call a sin, but his heart is in love with God. So I'm not saying he should remain in that place, but all I am saying is that it's very possible to be in that place.
Right.
And when you are in that place where you love Jesus, even though your flesh is addicted to sin, the outcome is that eventually God will set you free.
Right.
Because your hands or your outward appearance or your actions naturally follow the position of your heart.
Right. I think the difference is complacency or not. Like,
right.
Are you just willingly like, it is what it is. I'm going to love Jesus, but I'm not even going to deal with or worry about this other stuff.
Right.
It's like if you're actively, like, I think all of us collectively would understand this. Like, if you're in love with Jesus and you're trying to pursue him and live for him, there's still going to be things that you're just like, I'm so frustrated. I can't seem to get past this, whether it's gossip or whatever it is. Like your thing that you just have.
Right.
So,
your crutch, whatever.
Exactly. But you're still walking in relationship with God. Like you're not separated from him.
And eventually, because you're in love with Jesus and you're pursuing him and that's what's important to you and that's what you're in love with, eventually God will begin to help you and give you the strength to address the physical actions of our hands that we might be stuck in.
Right.
The physical sin tendencies that our flesh might be addicted to. God will eventually begin to address those things. But let's look at the contrast. If I'm stuck in a purity sermons mindset, or I'm stuck in a religious legalistic mindset where it's like, no, wait a minute, God, hold on, let's not talk to each other just yet. I need to deal with this, address this, fix this, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is that we're effectively pushing away the surgeon and trying to do surgery on ourselves.
Yeah.
We're trying to clean ourselves before we step into the shower. It doesn't make any sense. We can't do it. We're trying to put away and hide all of our junk in the closet before the house cleaner gets here. These are all the same analogy, but it's the same thing. We're sitting here trying to go, I'm going to fix and address the actions of my hand without ever addressing the actions of my heart. Mm-hmm. And what we just talked about is the fact that the heart affects the actions of the hands, not the other way around.
Right.
There is no level of me being able to tidy up my actions that will make me fall in love with Jesus. Mm-hmm. But falling in love with Jesus will cause my hands to follow in obedience.
Right.
That's where that verse comes in where Jesus is saying, I will know who loves me by who obeys my commandments. It's not saying the only way I know that you'll love me is if you choose to obey me. It's saying if you do love me, obedience will come naturally as a byproduct.
Right. And not that you'll never mess up, but that in general, being in proximity and relationship with God, he will change the desires of your heart.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Seek first the kingdom of God and all its righteousness, and then these things will be given unto you.
Right. Like that's how you hear stories of people who are in, they're Christians and then they've always had an alcohol addiction or whatever. And he gives them he just removes the taste for it from them. Like they don't even desire it anymore.
Absolutely.
Stuff like that we can't even physically imagine.
Yeah.
It's because proximity to God, relationship with God, can make things like that happen.
Absolutely. And I can say that personally from my life. The reason I can speak upon all of this is because I know. Mm-hmm. Like being addicted to nicotine for years, and pot was something that was a little bit more recent than nicotine. All of these things are things that God has set me free from, not because I chose to address them and I chose to buckle down and go, okay, I'm going to deal with these things. It's ultimately because I go, okay, God, in spite of my sin, I'm going to choose to worship you. In spite of my sin, I'm going to choose to love you. In spite of my sin, I'm going to choose to go to you. And when I do go to him, then he steps in and addresses my sin in a way that I never could on my own.
Right. Like, or I think it's important to make a distinction that like there is a level to where you do have to do stuff. It's not all on your own though. Like you said, it's a partnership with God. Like
absolutely,
God is walking alongside you in every step of you breaking free of that.
Yeah. But I think at the same time, there's an extent where I will never be able to fully choose to oppose my sin unless I fall in love with him first.
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm saying. There is an element of our free will choice that is required of us in order to receive deliverance. But I'll never be able to fully make that choice unless I'm choosing Jesus instead.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
But anyway, hold on. I want to make sure I cover everything in this in my notes because this is a big topic and I want to make sure we're thorough. So let's backtrack a little bit. There's a difference that we've talked about on this show before, and I want to make that disclaimer again or just highlight it again. The difference between salvation or positionally our standing with God and relationship, which would be our walk with God. So there are three aspects as far as our sin and our relation to God. There's God, our sin, and our own free will. Okay, so we're going to look at all three of these and how they affect both our salvation and our relationship. Within salvation, if we receive salvation, God is not going to distance himself from us. That's God's position, right? So again, Jesus steps in, he takes the punishment, takes the blame so that we can be blameless in front of God.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The next point is that if we receive salvation, our sin does not have the power to keep us out of heaven or hold us accountable for godly punishment. Okay. So that's how our sin is affected by our salvation. If I'm saved, sin no longer has a hold on me, and I no longer have to deal with the punishment of eternal separation from God. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The third point is our own free will. So as far as salvation, our own free will comes in when we choose to whether or not we want to accept salvation in the first place.
Right.
Okay. So let's get to the second part, which is relationship. So this is God's position as far as our relationship. Through relationship, God will continually and consistently make himself available to us. And he chooses not to separate himself from us regardless of how much we sin. Okay. Now this does not mean, again, that God condones our sin or that he likes our sin or the fact that he likes the fact that we sin, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that he's prepared to love us in spite of the fact that sin is bad and that we sometimes carry it out. Okay, so that's a part of God's character that's worth recognizing. Even though we sin, which is bad, and it grieves his heart, he's still willing to love us in spite of it. Second point, sin. Within a relationship with God, our sin in itself does not have the ability to interfere or create distance in our relationship with him. So that includes like what we've already talked about, which is if I sin, it's not going to separate me from him. It's not going to make it harder for me to hear his voice. It's not going to make it harder for me to engage in his presence and spend time with him because it doesn't have the power to relationally separate me. That's true, even though the repercussions of our sin can create suffering in our life because of the sin itself. Okay, so let's take a minute to talk about that. We constantly have made this disclaimer that sin is not good. Even though God is willing to forgive it and to love us in spite of it, it's still not good. And here's the reason why. Okay, I do want to talk about this. The reason why sin is bad is because it damages those who God loves. Right. We assume, especially through purity sermons, we assume that sin is bad because it makes us bad and it makes God hate us because we've sinned.
Exactly.
And that's not true. The reason God hates sin is not because he hates us when we sin. It's that he hates sin because of what it does to us, the ones he loves. So imagine if you have a child. And if you don't have a child, imagine you have a dog or something you care about a lot, right? I'm not a dog person, but it's fine. And they're playing out in, out in your yard or something, and you see a snake going up to your child/dog, right? Child/dog.
Okay.
If you know that snake is a threat, there's a certain level of, I don't like that thing. I hate that thing.
Yeah.
You're going to threaten my child. You're going to threaten my dog. You hate that thing enough to kill it in order to protect your child.
Right.
God looks at sin the same way. He doesn't hate the child. He hates the snake who's threatening the child. And it's the same thing with us and our sin. God doesn't hate you because you sin. He hates sin because of what it does to you, which has caused you suffering.
Yeah.
Not distance from him, but suffering as a repercussion.
And not only you, it affects other people.
Right.
Like sometimes
absolutely.
there is sins that don't directly seem to affect us that much, but they really hurt somebody else.
Right. And sometimes other people's sin affects us.
Exactly.
And we can understand the suffering that it causes that way too. But again, it's so important to recognize God does not hate us, the sinner. He hates the sin that hurts us.
Yeah.
Because we're the ones he loves.
Exactly.
But with all of that being said, let's touch on the last bullet point for this comparison. Okay, we're under the category of relationship and we're talking about our free will. Our free will is what decides how much or how little we want to have relationship with God, or whether or not we want to be in relationship with him at all. Okay? So the reason I'm bringing up this point is because, again, guilt and shame will try to influence our free will. If I choose to go, no, God, I don't want to address that part of my heart. I don't want to address that sin in my life. I don't want to necessarily, let's wait. Let's wait before I encounter you. Let's wait before I come before you because I have this over here to deal with. We're choosing to separate ourselves from God using our free will, and guilt and shame is the thing that's convinced us to do so.
Yeah.
And that is a bad thing, right? So the reason I'm bringing up free will altogether is because it's important to be intentional of our free will. Am I choosing to separate myself? Am I listening too much to guilt and shame? Or should I instead be listening to conviction that says run back to God regardless? Run back to God in spite of your sin.
Mm-hmm.
Because our free will does relationally have the power to separate us. If I choose to say, hold on, God, I don't want to address that just yet. God's a gentleman. He's not going to force himself on me. He's not going to go against my will and say, no, you have to spend time with me. No, we have to do freedom and deliverance right now. No,
right.
He's not going to do that. He's going to go, okay, we won't address it just yet. That's all right. We'll go at your pace.
Yeah.
But that's why we need to be all the more intentional and go, okay, am I bringing this to God through conviction, or am I hiding it from him through guilt and shame?
Right.
So I'm just going to read off this next bullet point just because it's here. And it's something worth talking about. So just to recap, when we sin, God will not choose to separate himself from us. Our sin does not have the power to separate us from God, but our free will choice is the only thing that can allow us to willingly choose to distance ourselves from God relationally, not salvationally, but relationally. So not positionally, but in our walk. I can say, wait a minute, I don't want to talk just yet. Wait a minute, I don't want to spend time just yet. But it doesn't change my identity as a son.
Right.
Right. That is an important distinction to make.
It doesn't change the fact that he wants to talk to you.
Right. It doesn't change his opinion of us. It doesn't change his character either.
Mm-hmm.
I can say, Lord, I'm not ready to talk about that. And he's still, okay, I'll wait here patiently. I'll spend time with you when you're ready. Mm-hmm. When you're ready to come back to me, I'll be here. You know, you're still my son. Even if we get angry at God sometimes too, where we go, God, I don't want to talk to you anymore. He goes, okay, but I still love you because you're my son. I'm still here. But anyway, that's an important thing to notice. The next thing I want to talk about is the motive behind our choice. Why am I choosing to try to avoid my sin? Is it because I'm pridefully choosing legalism or religion, quote unquote, by saying, oh, I'm good enough. I can uphold the standard. I can follow the rules so perfectly, and I can follow the rules better than the person next to me. Mm-hmm. Is that the reason I'm trying to avoid bad and pursue good? Or is it because another false motivation can be, again, guilt and shame? Maybe I'm trying to avoid punishment. Maybe I'm trying to make sure that God will continue to love me, right? And of course, that's not how it works. But is that the reason I'm trying to avoid bad and pursue good? Because I'm afraid that God will punish me if I don't? Or I'm afraid that he'll distance himself if I don't?
Yeah.
Which again is not true. Or am I doing it through the correct heart posture and the correct motive, which is to say, I'm going to pursue what's good and avoid what's bad because I love you, Jesus. And I want to do what you want me to do. You see what I'm saying? It goes back to that verse of, I will know who loves me by who obeys my commands. I'm going to be obedient and do what you want me to do because I love you, Jesus. You see what I'm saying? So the motivation isn't purity or perfection or pride that comes from it. And it's not guilt and shame out of fear of punishment. I'm doing what God's asking me to do because I love him. And I know he's a good God and it's worth doing. Mm-hmm. And I know what he's asking me to do, he's asking me to do because he loves me, right? Okay, so yeah, there's another point that we also kind of addressed a little bit already, which is God is far more concerned about the reason why we make choices than he is about the physical choices that are made, right? Now, it is important. We don't want to just be complacently sinning and doing whatever we're impulsively wanting to do. I think we all, to some base level knowledge, know and understand this. Wrong is wrong. Right is right. We want to try and choose right more than we choose wrong. But at the same time, we also have to recognize God prioritizes us more than he prioritizes right or wrong.
Okay, so we had some technical difficulties, but we're back. Okay, so just for the listeners, we kind of went on, like we just kept rolling as if the camera was rolling and it wasn't recording. So we lost quite a bit of information. So we're just going to try and go back and touch on it the best we can. And most of this stuff is spontaneous. Like obviously I'm reading off some notes. Yeah, so we'll try our best. Are you happy now that you scooted this little nookie pillow?
Isn't it cute? Look, it does remind me of nookies.
I like them. And my buddy.
They're cute and they're cushy.
Write in the comments what you think this pillow's name should be.
No. Also, we're about to get a whole new
also people will still come back here if we have more people on. When we do have more people on, we'll come back to the couch because there's more.
Wait, what was that from?
What?
False. Oh,
Dwight.
Dwight.
Come
Okay.
on. We just finished talking about The Office.
Okay.
Anyway,
I thought a braveheart. I thought that was Donald Trump for some reason, but I was like, that doesn't sound right.
dude, Donald Trump and Dwight Schrute kind of have that similar energy for sure.
How so?
I would love to see both of them in a room together.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
Mr. President.
As Michael comes in and he has trouble like deciding who he should give authority to. Okay, refocus. Here we go. So the point I was making when we weren't recording was a lot of times when we do get into purity mindsets, especially the ones that are associated to pride, not so much the guilt and shame ones. So when I say pride, I mean our motivation is I can fulfill the rules. I can do X, Y, and Z. Look at how good I am at this. Whenever we do get in those situations, a lot of times God ends up carrying out that delusion where we think we can actually uphold the standard.
Yeah.
He reminds us that we can't. And it's not to hurt us or to tear down our ego. It's so that we can begin to prioritize the right things, like the position of our heart, instead of the actions of our hands.
You know, it reminds me of that saying that people talk about, like, God won't give you more than you can handle.
Right.
But it's like, no, he does that all the time.
Right.
Like to remind you that you can't handle it on your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If we could fulfill the standard, then we wouldn't rely on God to help us do it.
Yeah. Exactly. And then we'd be all practical, like, but I did.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would, again, if we could fulfill ultimately, like we're talking about sin, if we could fulfill the standard and we could be good enough to not sin, then we wouldn't need Jesus.
Right.
And the gospel,
Galatians,
the gospel
book talks about.
Right. The gospel wouldn't be necessary, which means why would God do it in the first place? Everything would come crumbling down structurally. As someone who is a Christian, you have to some extent, recognize we can't fulfill the standard on our own. Well, there is no extent in which we can be good or pure enough on our own. Keywords, on our own.
Right.
We should still strive to do what is right and avoid what is wrong, but we should do it, 1, with the right heart posture, and 2, in the right order, and 3, with Jesus. Okay? So let's recap what we've talked about so far. And that was our recap. 1, we should do it with the right motive. So we're doing it because we love God, not because we think we can uphold the standard or we get pride from it, and not because we're afraid of punishment or motivated by guilt and shame. We should do it for the right reason, the right motive. 2, we should do it in the right order, which means we're not trying to clean ourselves before we go in the shower. We're not trying to make ourselves perfect and then go to God. We're trying to go to God so that he can make us perfect. That's the right order. Okay? And then the third part is we're doing it alongside of God. We're doing it with God, not for God. There's something I want to retouch on real quick. Okay. So the contrast between our hands and our heart, the position of our heart and the actions we carry out. A lot of times we measure ourselves, but also other people based on their actions instead of looking at the position of the heart. So a lot of times the mindset we have is that we can look at someone and go, oh, wow, look at how they're sinning. They must not have a relationship with God. Look at how they're imperfect. They must not love God. While at the same time, we can look at someone who's religious a lot of times and go and compare and say, oh, wow, they're so put together. They must be a good Christian. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff is just blatantly not true. Like, that's not the way it works. God doesn't look at the hands. He looks at the heart.
Exactly.
You know, and that goes back to that verse where it blatantly says God looks at our heart. But I just think that's so awesome and so important, because if we're constantly measuring our value and our worth and how well we have a relationship with God based off of just our actions, that's a problem, because we will never be able to clean up in a way that our actions are absolutely without flaw and without sin and without imperfection. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're always going to have mistakes, but the important part is the inward. So do we view that sin as a mistake, or do we view it as a choice we've made because we want to and we love it? So we talked a little bit about this, but I just want to put some analogies and get your thoughts on these analogies. Okay. So I call it, because again, I've never heard of anything like this before. This is stuff that I've done my own research on and kind of formulated and put together myself, but I call it our directional motivation. So we've talked a little bit about purity and perfection and pride and guilt and shame out of fear of punishment. Okay. Those are 2 different directions that we can go in our heart when it comes to addressing our sin. Either we try to uphold the standard out of purity and perfection and pride, or we try to do it because we're afraid of punishment or afraid that God will distance himself. Another one we haven't talked about is complacency. And it's not necessarily trying to do what's good and trying to avoid what's bad. It's almost the opposite. It's just doing nothing, not caring.
Which is, definitely dangerous.
Right. Very dangerous. But you're just like, it's fine. God forgives me. It's okay. I don't have to worry about it. That's not what we're advocating for. Throughout this entire episode, I want to make that clear. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying be complacent with your sin. We're not saying be complacent with your life or your choices or your actions or the position of your heart, right? God very much does want us to be intentional, okay? So a fourth option is pursuing Jesus and doing what's right because we want to be close to him and because we want to do what pleases him and be obedient as an act of love, as a byproduct of love. So one of these metaphors that I like to use is riding a bike, which explains our directional motivation. If you're just sitting there and you're trying to balance, one hand is guilt and shame, and the other hand is pride and purity and perfection. If I'm not moving anywhere, it's very easy for me to fall into either one of those extremes. And if I'm not moving, it's because I'm complacent, right?
Right.
So if I'm just stopped, it's very easy for me to tip over off the bike and fall. But if I'm moving towards Jesus and pursuing him, we talked about this in a little bit in other episodes. If we're pursuing Jesus because we love him, I won't be able to fall into complacency and get lazy with it because God will call me to live to a higher standard. If I'm pursuing Jesus, I won't be able to allow purity and perfection and pride and works to become my highest motivation or my highest priority because Jesus will be my highest priority.
Yeah.
If I'm pursuing Jesus as my first priority and my highest priority, I won't be able to be motivated by guilt and shame because I'll recognize his character through relationship. I'll know he won't turn his face from me. He won't be ashamed or disappointed in me. He won't hate me because of my sin, right? So ultimately, pursuing Jesus is the greatest equalizer we can have when it comes to addressing our sin. If I'm trying to do what's right because I love God and I want to do what's best for him, or I want to do it right. It'll keep me out of all of these different areas of extremes that can cause us problems when it comes to purity sermon. So ultimately, the end all be all is love Jesus, engage in relationship in spite of your sin, and then everything else will fall into place, like we've talked about. Seek first the kingdom of God and all its righteousness, and then these things will be given unto you. Delight yourself in the Lord, and then he'll give you the desires of your heart. Right? It doesn't mean he'll give you whatever your heart desires. It means that he'll give your heart new and godly desire. It's kind of like another analogy is like a broken down car, right? I don't really have a name for all these analogies, but one of our lights went out. That means it's getting close to time to wrap up. But another analogy that's interesting is the car analogy. So what happens when our car engine light pops on? There's multiple things that we can do, right? We can try to go the route of purity and perfection and try to fix it ourselves. And we're assuming that you don't have car knowledge in this analogy, right? So you could pop the hood and try to fix it yourself, probably mess some things up, but you'll try, right? And you don't ever fulfill the standard perfectly. Or guilt and shame is the pathway where you cover up the engine light with a piece of tape and pretend like it's not there. Complacency is seeing the engine light and just not caring and just driving anyway and waiting for your car to just fall apart. You just don't care. But the correct response is to go to Jesus, or in other words, the only one who can fix it, the mechanic, right? And say, hey, I've got this problem and you're the only one who can fix it. So here I am. You see what I'm saying? That's the way that we should begin to address our sin. That's the biggest problem with purity sermons in general, is that it teaches us these wrong pathways and these wrong ways to address our sin. But ultimately, the best thing we can do is just be vulnerable, humble, willing, vulnerable, and fully surrendered. For that's what we'll talk about next episode. Stay tuned. Something that's really cool that we talked about at the beginning is how we're solid in our salvation. The purity sermon's mindset teaches us that one, sin can separate us from God, and then it's our job, two, that it's our job to fix it, right? So the coolest thing about the gospel is that believing in Jesus and accepting salvation isn't so much about having a clean slate as it is about having a slate that can't be dirty. I think that's a really powerful way to look at the gospel and look at our relationship with God, because if we begin to recognize that when I accept salvation, I can't be dirty, we start to walk and come before God in a completely different way. I don't have to have shame. I don't have to have guilt. I can come before him blameless. That's what it says. Quote the verse. But yeah, that's what it talks about. Being able to come before God without guilt and shame. And that's something that for me was so powerful, because for so many years, that's all I would do, is come before God with this heavy weight of just, here, God, here's all my blech, let's deal with this. And then you'd be so exhausted after doing that you're just done spending time with him. And that's all you did the whole time, was just begging and pleading for forgiveness, even though you've already been forgiven at the moment of salvation. You know what I mean? Like, why is purity sermons important to you as a person, as an individual? I'll just hold my note. No, but for real, like because I know that when we started dating and like spending time together and talking about Jesus and talking about this kind of stuff, there was a shift in your mindset going from something else to an understanding of faith. What was that shift like for you? Like, what were some of the things that you noticed that was like, I've never heard of it before?
Yeah, I think one of them was like what you just said about this, like, can't be dirty or whatever. Like, yeah, I never really thought about it like that. And I think just like trying always to, like, I understood the whole like your works don't save you.
Yeah.
But it never clicked. Like, it never mattered to me because I was still like, okay, God still loves me. But I think I wanted to, like I said, earn brownie points with God. I was like, I'm going to go above and beyond. Like, I was just so just doing and doing and doing and doing. And then whenever things got to a point where I was like, okay, it's not as pretty and perfect as I thought it was going to be. Like, life is not what I thought is going to happen, especially in regards to purity and everything. Nothing was picture perfect. And that was a moment where God was just like, okay, then you need to release the idea that your everything, like purity is your actions, because purity is me, is a big shift for me.
That's so good. Yeah, but I can relate to that a lot too. It wasn't, for me personally, like there was aspects where like I was battling with guilt and shame and perfectionism and stuff like that. But also at the same time, it was very much of like I understand my works don't earn X, Y, and Z, but I'm still going to try.
You always have it.
You know, like,
But yeah, I hear that. Well, whatever. I'm going to say, that's like the whole thing. I was like, yeah, he loves me. Works don't matter, whatever.
right.
But I just didn't listen to him.
Yeah. And it's very like you were talking about, it's very wired into our subconscious. So like consciously we can go, oh, wow, that's such a cool message, but still walk away not applying it to our lives.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so easy to do that. But that's definitely something that's interesting. That's worth noting.
I thought it was interesting too. We were in the church group last year, and somebody brought up purity culture, and then everyone in the room said like how it had affected them to like a personal deep level growing up. And I'm like, it is the problem.
Yeah.
And like we talked about this so many times where like we talked about the analogies of like the paper being crumpled and all that. It's a fear tactic. Like parents and you pastors or whoever it is, they use it to get kids, most of the time kids, to not sin, right?
Yeah.
We don't want people running around doing this and this. So we're going to fear tactic them into being terrified that if they mess up, God's going to like
smite them or something.
Yeah. Or even you're just gonna be
disappointed.
Like he's gonna be looking down at you now. You're like, well, your life would have been so good if you had not done that. But it's like that's not the gospel. That's not it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, again, this stuff is so difficult because it's subliminal and it's subconscious. So I think a lot of people who preach these kind of messages mean well. Like, I don't think they're all deceivers. I think they're deceived. Like, they've been told this lie before and they've heard it in other places. Because a lot of times, whether we want to admit it or not, and I know sometimes we step on toes in this podcast, but I think a lot of times pastors, preachers, and even influencers and people who just like talking about Jesus, they hear a message, you go, wow, that's good. I should talk more about that too, without taking the time to use critical thinking to go, okay, does this actually align with the gospel?
Yeah.
So we hear other messages and go, oh, they got a lot of good response. Maybe I should do that too. Maybe I should say that in my church. Maybe I should say that, whatever. So I don't want to go so far as to say, I'm not saying you're saying this, but I don't want to go so far as to say like, oh, shame on all these pastors and preachers and stuff, because a lot of times they're not the deceivers, they're the deceived.
Right. I think, like you said,
but it's very much a strategy of the enemy to try to get us to respond in guilt and shame.
I think a lot of parents, especially like whenever the purity movement or whatever stuff started, it came from a good place in the sense of like, I want my kids to like Jesus. I want them to be righteous, right? I want them to do things right. But the result of it and the way it played out was very harmful,
right,
in ways they didn't understand was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then you have generations of people who have twisted minds, twisted mental state about purity and what it means to be pure. Because again, when we say purity, most time you're talking about like abstinence or something like that.
The actions of the hands.
Right. So then we associate, okay, to be pure, it means be a virgin, to be this. So
sinless.
Okay?
To be sinless.
Right. And then on the other side, we forget Jesus is purity. Like he's the only one who is pure, right? That's the only way we can achieve purity. It's through Jesus. So yeah.
That's so good. Oh, that's the gospel. Absolutely. There is no purity other than the one that we can get from Jesus.
Right.
And purity sermons is a lie that tells you there's an alternative option.
Yeah.
You can manufacture it. You can uphold it. You can do it on your own. That's not the truth. Jesus is the only way we can uphold the standard.
Yeah.
Is the only way. But again, like you touched on, the position of our heart, the directional motivation matters. We have all of these parents who are trying to create this movement or whatever. We don't know exactly how it started, but that's our estimate, and it's a pretty fair guesstimate, is we have all these people who are trying to help others stay pure and stay out of sin because of how destructive sin can be. And that's very true, but they chose the wrong directional motivation to use.
Yeah.
Fear, or in other words, guilt and shame, or fear of punishment, is not a good motivator to get people to stop sinning because blatantly it doesn't work. Instead of helping people out of sin, it really just changes people's perspective of God. They start to think that God is a person who will be disappointed in them when they do sin, or that he'll distance himself.
He completely removes his grace as well, too.
Right.
That's like not even a factor in any of these messages that I'm talking about.
And his unconditional love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it makes everything conditional. It's like everything is, if you're a good kid, you're gonna get the reward, right? But if you're not, well, too bad. Like you could have had something good. And that's not what it is. Like that's not true. But they don't want to say to kids like, oh, if you mess up, God will still love you, because then they're afraid that they're gonna go, oh, great, now I can go
Right.
do whatever.
They assume that they're just going to embrace the idea of anarchy and just
It's like
completely dive off the deep.
projection
Yeah.
is what they're worried about happening. Which again, I get it, I understand it, but it really is harmful.
Yeah. And I know that there's a lot of people who are watching this video and feeling the same thing. Like, oh my gosh, this message is dangerous, because when people find out that God forgives them to that extent, they're going to go and, do something horribly, absolutely terrible. But here's the thing we have to remember. God's justice as part of his character is wired into our nature. From a very base instinct, we have a concept of right and wrong morally. We have a conscience. Even people who don't have God have the idea of right and wrong morally.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be afraid to tell people that there's the option of real forgiveness, because with the fear that they're going to dive off the deep end. Because again, people understand that there's right and wrong. We just naturally do. It's just instilled in us as part of God's character. Because again, we're made in his image. So that aspect of his character is also hardwired into it. So we shouldn't be afraid of that. We can freely preach the message that is grace, the message that is forgiveness.
That's not to say that just because it's hardwired into us, people still choose
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Obviously.
100%.
But especially if you are a Christian, if you do love Jesus, I think the chances of you overindulging in the idea of, oh, I'm good, I can do whatever I want, and not having conviction or not wrestling with that at all, is a lot less likely than the reality of you falling into guilt and shame and distancing yourself from God.
The counterbalance of overindulgence in sin is conviction. So again, the fear that kids or people or whoever hears this message will dive off into the deep end and just completely indulge in their sin, the counterbalance of that is conviction, like you said. So we have to ask ourselves, what actually brings conviction? We talked about the difference between conviction and guilt and shame. That's the problem. Purity sermons is to manufacture its own conviction, and really it's just preaching guilt and shame. You better not sin because X, Y, and Z, or shame on you, or there's something wrong with you. That's guilt and shame. The Holy Spirit is the thing that brings conviction. Relationship with Jesus is the thing that brings real conviction. So instead of telling these people that they should avoid their sin because God's going to hate them, instead we should be telling them that, hey, God loves you in spite of your sin. And that's all the more reason to run to him. Because when you do, it'll bring conviction, which addresses sin and actually brings real freedom and deliverance. You see what I'm saying? The answer should be run to Jesus, not fix yourself. Ultimately, that's the key.
Absolutely.
I think that's a pretty good segue, because again, the next episode we're going to talk about is, what does deliverance look like? What does it actually mean to be set free from sin?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does that process look like? How do I actually go through that? How does God bring me through that? What is my role to play and what is his? We're going to talk all about that in the next episode. So stay tuned.
Bye. Bye.